She rode through deserts like a warrior, spoke Latin like a scholar, and ruled an empire that even Rome feared. Her name was Zenobia, Queen of Palmyra. And when she dared to defy the world's greatest empire, they didn't just punish her. They paraded her through the streets in chains. That this isn't legend. It's history at its most brutal, death forgotten. Queens and fallen empires fascinate you. Subscribe now and witness the rise and ruin of a queen who wouldn't kneel long. Before she wore a crown, Zenobia stood out. Born in the 3rd century in the city of Palmyra between east and west, she was no ordinary noblewoman. She spoke several languages, hunted on horseback, and studied Roman law like a future emperor. But she wasn't born to rule. That changed when her husband, King Adonis, was assassinated with his death. The crown should have passed to her young son, but instead, Zenobia seized the reins of power herself, not as a regent, but as a ruler in Rome. Rome wasn't ready. Zenobia didn't just sit on the throne, she expanded it under her command. Palmyra rose from a regional kingdom to a full-blown empire. But she took Egypt as she pushed into Asia Minor, as she controlled vital Roman trade routes and declared her son emperor. And while Rome was busy battling chaos in the west, Zenobia was building power in the east, city by city, desert by desert. But this wasn't reckless ambition. It was strategy that she wore. Royal robes, led armies on horseback, and signed decrees in both Latin and Greek that to her people she wasn't a queen. She was their empire's beating heart. That a te first, Rome ignored her. They thought she'd fade. Just another Eastern ruler trying to play queen. But when Zenobia claimed Egypt, the empire's grain lifeline, everything changed suddenly. The Senate whispered her name with fear. She had her own coins minted. Her army wore Palmyrene armor, not Roman duh, and her son was now being called Augustus, a title meant for emperors, not desert princes. Rome's pride was wounded. Its power was threatened. And when Emperor Aurelian rose to power, he made one thing painfully clear: Zenobia will kneel or fall. Aurelian didn't send diplomats. He sent legions that with steel in their hands and fury in their hearts. Roman forces began marching east, determined to erase the woman who dared challenge them. But Zenobia didn't flee. As she rallied her soldiers, fortified cities, and rode into battle herself, that her empire was young, but her will was ancient, that she knew the terrain. She knew Rome's weaknesses, and for a moment, it looked like she might win. But Rome was relentless, and Aurelian wasn't just fighting for land. He was fighting to restore his empire's broken pride. That the war had become personal. City after city fell to Aurelian's fury, and soon his legions reached the gates of Palmyra, itself the jewel of Zenobia's empire. Inside, the queen stood tall, but outside, her enemies surrounded her. Supplies ran low. Allies disappeared. The desert that once protected her now became a trap. Still, she didn't surrender. Instead, she rode out on horseback under cover of night, hoping to reach Persia and raise a new army. But the Romans were faster as she was, captured by the banks of the Euphrates. Her escape cut short by imperial horsemen. That the queen of defiance was now Rome's prisoner. Rome didn't execute Zenobia on the battlefield. That would have been too merciful. That instead, they chose humiliation. That Aurelian paraded her across the empire captive, not as a forgotten rebel, but as a trophy. Got in 274 AD during his grand triumph in Rome. She was brought out in golden chains adorned and jewels, walked on foot while crowds jeered and roared. That the once ruler of the East, now just a symbol of Rome's revenge. But even in shackles, she stood tall. That witnesses said she held her head high, a queen even in disgrace. And then the story blurs. Some say Zenobia was executed quietly. away from the crowds. Others claim she was spared, granted a Roman villa, given tutors for her children, and forced into a life of silent exile that Aurelian may have admired her intellect. Or perhaps Rome preferred her alive as a living reminder that no one escapes there. Reached. But no matter which version is true, one thing remains. Zenobia, the woman who once ruled lands from Egypt to Anatolia, never saw her empire again, and Palmyra was reduced. Its queen, erased from power, but not from memory. Centuries passed, empires rose and crumbled, but Zenobia's name never vanished. In the ruins of Palmyra, travelers still whispered of a queen who once defied the gods of empire. Poets called her rebel. Historians called her brilliant. Some called her foolish for challenging Rome. Others called her heroic for even trying. But the desert, the very land she once ruled, still carries her legacy in the dust, the stones, the broken archways of a fallen kingdom. Because what Zenobia built wasn't just an empire, it was a legend. That Zenobia's story lives in a strange space caught between history and legend. She was not born into global power, nor was she backed by dynasties of conquerors. That she rose because she was sharp, that she led because she was unafraid, and she lost. Not because she was weak, but because she dared to, much too fast. A Rome crushed many rebels, but few of them wore crowns, and fewer still were remembered with reverence instead of shame. That Zenobia did not fade, though she became a mirror for every leader who ever asked, how far can I go before the world says no? Zenobia was beaten, chained, and displayed, but somehow never truly broken. That was her real power. Even in defeat, she refused to beg. Even in chains, she carried herself like a sovereign, and that unsettled her enemies more than her armies ever had. Because Rome could conquer lands, it could tear down cities, but it couldn't erase the image of a queen who ruled with both sword and intellect. She reminded the world that power isn't always loud, that sometimes it rides in silence, wearing defiance like armored. At Zenobia's fall didn't just echo in palaces, it rippled through generations of royal women that from queens in Byzantium to rebels in North Africa her name became a quiet anthem not for conquest, but for courage done not for rebellion, but for the right to rule in an age where women were expected to watch history. She rewrote it. She proved that empires weren't just a man's game, yet that intellect, vision, and bravery didn't ask for permission. And even centuries later, daughters of empires whispered her name, not as a warning, but as a challenge. Palmyra was more than Zenobia's capital. That was her dream. Made stone columns that touched the sky, temples that blended east and west on markets filled with silk, spices, and philosophies. She didn't just want land, she wanted legacy. Under her rule, Palmyra became a bridge between cultures, languages, and empires. That a place where Rome met Persia and bowed to neither even after its fall. Travelers who wandered through its ruins didn't see defeat, that they saw the ambition of a queen who thought beyond borders and dared to make beauty political. Today, Palmyra stands in ruin. Time, war, and conquest chipped away. That's glory. But amidst the silence, Zenobia still lingers, not in voice, but in absence, in the empty arches where her banners once flew, and in the cracked roads where her armies once marched. She may not have lived to rebuild what she lost, but her ghost walks those sands with pride, because not every queen is remembered for how long she ruled. Some are remembered for how fearlessly they rose, knowing they might fall beneath the armor. Behind the crown, Zenobia was still human, that she loved philosophy. She debated with scholars. She raised her son not just to rule, but to think. She wasn't driven by greed. She was driven by vision. A